So I moved to Honolulu about 6 years ago. More specifically, I moved to downtown Honolulu about 6 years ago. Not in that building though, but I moved to downtown Honolulu from Kaneohe, which is where I grew up. And while it seems like the dream to live in downtown, so you don't have to drive in that horrible Oahu traffic every single day, I noticed that I've changed. So let's talk about some of these changes that you might experience if you move into downtown Honolulu, and how I went from a nice, fun-loving country boy to a more hardened and cold townie. Just kidding, but kind of not really.
Hello from Hawaii.
So first, my quality of life has improved by moving into downtown. Downtown is pretty much where most of the jobs are, and people tend to live further west or north or east, and they all commute every single day. And having grown up in Kaneohe my whole life, I made that drive for school because I went to school in town, and ultimately when I moved back and started working here, my workplace was in downtown. And so every single day I'd make that long 35 to 50 minute drive just to get to work in time. And it may not seem that bad, 30 to 50 minutes. I know other places you have to commute a lot longer, but I was also waking up a lot earlier. And so it affected my quality of life. I wanted to avoid the traffic, so I'd wake up and leave the house by 5:15, get into town, and then that way I don't have to worry about the traffic. Of course, after work it would be horrible because then I'd have to drive no matter what. I'm stuck driving in traffic unless I want to stay in town and avoid having to battle everyone trying to get home. Now, doing that every single day adds up. And so by not having to drive every single day, it saves a lot of time, which is great. I found that being able to walk to more places, I have more disposable free time. I'm not in a rush as much, particularly in the mornings. I'm able to wake up at a fairly decent time now. Of course, I got 2 kids, but I'm not in a rush to get to work because I'm able to walk there. And so it just makes it a lot less stressful to have to wake up and do things in the morning. And it's also nice too that I'm able to get home fairly quickly so I can help out my wife. And of course I can go home, cook rice, eat dinner fairly fast because I don't have to commute an extra hour just to get home and start all those chores. By the way, what is this? Oh, that's cool. Oh, it's vintage collectibles. Interesting. But I do want to mention some of the downsides of that lack of driving. And I think it's important to talk about those things. Things that I never really would have realized until I actually moved into town, having commuted every single day of pretty much my school and adult life. When I first moved into town, I didn't have to drive as much, obviously. So I was driving maybe once every 2 weeks. And so of course my gas bill was so low because I probably filled up once a month or once every 6 weeks. And then when I got married, maybe I had to drive once every week, maybe go to the grocery store, but I wasn't driving as much. And I noticed that because I wasn't driving as much, I started to get this driving anxiety almost. It was really weird. Like, I didn't want to drive and I'd get super nervous and scared. And again, this is coming from someone who was driving every single day, pretty much of my adult life here. And now I was like nervous and scared to go and drive. I just didn't feel like I could do it. Well, now that I have kids, it's a totally different story because I have to drive every single time that they need to go somewhere. So doctor or some kind of activity, I just gotta go and do it. So that's helped me with my, I guess you can call it driving anxiety. It's still there sometimes, and I feel that nervousness, I feel like that stress or that anxiety of going and wanting to drive, when really I never had that before moving into downtown. And sometimes I do miss that commute. I know it sounds crazy, right? I'm sure the guys on the west side are thinking, are you nuts? But I actually do miss that commute sometimes. There was an article by the Harvard Business Review that talked about the benefits of commuting and how people are gonna have to now figure out ways to seek those benefits in other ways because we're commuting less with remote work. Again, don't get me wrong, I don't miss driving in the traffic, especially when it's raining on the H1 and forget about it. It's gonna take you like 2 hours to get home. But there are benefits to that quiet time, to that alone time that you have with yourself, where you can listen to a podcast or an audiobook, just think thoughts, listen to music, just unwind before you end up starting your whole day. The second thing that I realized was don't fall for the downtown trap. In other words, remember to get out of town every once in a while. And actually, this is quite hard to remember because downtown's pretty much has everything that you need. It has good food, it has all the stores, it has the beach, it's close, although I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's close. And you just have everything that you need, that there's no real push to go anywhere else unless you really need to go specifically for like a hike or just a very unique place. But it's important to remember to also drive out to the west side and also the windward side. There's so many unique things, particularly the natural beauty, that you just don't get here in downtown. I mean, you get used to it. You get used to all of the condos. I don't know if you can see that, but you get used to all the condos. You get used to all the concrete and the roads and the sounds and the ambulance sounds and sirens, that you sometimes forget that life is more than just downtown. It's just more than just buildings here. As someone who grew up basically next to a mountain with all the waterfalls right there, I mean, I don't get that. The closest mountain is right there, and it's not even a real mountain. It's like Punch Bowl. There's no waterfalls or anything there. And kind of another way to explain it is sometimes on Oahu, we tend to think that Hawaii revolves around Oahu, right? That's where the most jobs are, that's where the most people are, the capital, everything is just here. And so it's really easy to have this mindset that Hawaii is just Oahu. And I think if you go talk to some neighbor island folks, they'll kind of remind you sometimes like, Hawaii is not just Oahu. And to make sure to be mindful of the needs of the neighbor island residents. And likewise, I think on an even smaller scale, Oahu is not just Honolulu. Now, we have a lot of stuff going here, but there's other parts of the island that also are part of our Oahu. They're our community, they're our neighbors. Like, I think about places like where I grew up, Kaneohe or Kahalu, or some of those North Shore small towns. You got Wailua, you got Nanakuli out on the west side. Like, all these little small communities are also Oahu, and not all of Oahu looks like that. Can you see it? Yeah, it doesn't all look like this. In some parts of Oahu, or Hawaii, but specifically Oahu, there aren't any tall towers. Growing up in Kaneohe, I think the tallest building, there were like some condos, but for the most part, you could always see the mountain. Now here, where I live, I can't see the mountain when I'm walking around. I can't see the ocean, I can't see really much. It just is streets and cars and roads, and I get it. That's the sacrifice that you make for living in urban Honolulu. But I do miss it, and I think there is that connection to nature that you do miss out on when you move into town. And again, it's so hard to get away because downtown has pretty much everything that you need, and so I think it takes a lot more effort to go out there and experience and enjoy the natural beauty that we have, because it's harder to get to and there's just more here that makes you comfortable. And the last thing is kind of a sense of a lack of community here in downtown. Now, where you're from and where you grew up is important in Hawaii. It's why we ask each other, what school you in, grad? Because where you graduated from high school says a lot about where you grew up and the kind of qualities or kind of person that you are. Now, I understand that there's a lot of generalizations and assumptions made in that question, but it gives us a general understanding of your experiences and particularly any shared experiences. But I noticed that when you grow up in downtown Honolulu, there's not much community, not like that same connection where if you grew up in other parts of the island, oh boy, the bond is really strong. So like for me, I grew up in Kaneohe, 96744, and anybody else who grew up in Kaneohe, they're gonna feel like a bond to me, even though I didn't graduate from Castle. I know, I graduated from McKinley, but I grew up in Kaneohe, so I'm Kaneohe boy. But when you grow up in a place like that, you're proud of that. And everyone else who grows up there, you share like a very strong common bond. And it's even stronger for other communities here on Oahu. Think about Waimanalo, Waianae, some of those places. Those guys are really proud to be from there, and they should be. And anyone who grows up in that community is a part of that community pretty much for life. And that becomes a very big part of their identity, even through adulthood. But I found that when you're from town or when you grow up in town, there's not that same connection. And maybe it's because most people just come to downtown to work, and so it's really kind of just a transient place where people come here to work, but they're not really settled here. Or when you live in downtown particularly, you're living typically in condos or apartments, and so it's harder to get to know people because everyone's sort of living in their own little space. It may also be a demographic thing where maybe because downtown has a lot more like new construction and people buying from other places, maybe not necessarily from Hawaii, but there's locals here, but maybe not as much as some of the other more established communities, then there's just that lack of connection because there's just a lack of history. And of course, people renting a lot more here. It's just more of a transient neighborhood that it is harder to get to know people who live here because oftentimes they come here and maybe they're gone within 5 years. But I also just think it's just people in town, they just go about their daily lives. It's a lot busier here because again, there's more stuff to do. So I think it's harder to get to know people and just to build those routines where you bump into people and you get to know each other. And again, I'm not saying that it's totally absent here in town and that you cannot make friends. It's just a different feeling. It's a different community in town. So when I first moved to Honolulu from Kaneohe, I thought that was a huge accomplishment. Not because living in town is particularly better and that if you live in town, all of a sudden now you've made it for some reason. No, it's not really that. Actually, it was mostly just because I was able to get my own place and live on my own. That's mostly what I was proud of. And if that was in Aiea, then that would have been great. But it just happened to have a place where there was closer to town and closer to work, and so why not? But living in town has definitely changed me. I think for the better in a lot of ways. I've gotten a lot of time with my family. I would not have as much time every single day to spend with my family, to be able to stay with them early in the morning or also to come home fairly quickly right after work. I also think for my mental health, not driving in traffic every single day, it does help. I don't think I could make that 1.5-hour commute from Kapolei or Ewa Beach to downtown every single day. That would be too much time for me personally to just sit around in a car, and it would drive me crazy after a while. I become very agitated and stressed, and I'm thinking over the years and decades of doing that, I don't know how that would affect me for the positive. Again, there are benefits to commuting, but that much commuting I don't think I could do. But I do miss that community. And yeah, you can find it here in downtown. I do miss the natural beauty and the environment and being able to see the mountains whenever I want. I do miss that because you just can't do that here. You can drive a little bit of ways, but the way that downtown is just set up, you really got to go out of your way and take that initiative to get out there and see those things. The accessibility for those things is not as convenient or easy. Like I mentioned in a previous video, if I could live anywhere on Oahu, I'd live in Kaneohe. It's about 30 minutes with no traffic, 50 minutes with traffic, and maybe 1.15 hours with rain plus traffic. But it's close enough to town where it's not that far of a commute, and yet I'm still able to enjoy a lot of the natural beauty, and I've got family in the area. That, to me, that's a nice balance. Because I love the fact that when I was younger, I was only 15 minutes away from my grandma's house. And now we're a little bit further away from my parents, so my kids, they don't quite get to experience that same closeness. But who knows? Maybe we'll be able to get a place over there someday. So thanks for watching, and aloha.